Vagrancy by Angelee Sailor Anderson. The foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. Matthew 8:20. I dreamt the dream that night, as I had done so many nights before. Strange, ironically so, that I should have dreamt it then, considering what came after. The dream had practiced upon me too much for me to feel surprise. Yet my heart leapt as always with expectancy when the door between my bedroom and the world flew open, admitting the wind, and something more. Gold glitter shot into the paint on my ceiling, reminded me, but the wind and the unnamed force abiding in it were never content with that. They propelled me from my bed into the street, and thence into the sky where the actual stars glittered so much more achingly. Borne away into the dark, exhilarated yet in continual fear of falling, I passed over deserts, mountains, oceans, breathlessly. At last I was set down in my bare feet, where middle night lay on a land less constructed than my own, and greener. In my not quite opaque nightgown, I climbed a cobbled pathway to a Tudor-style house, in fact a mansion, whose heavy doors were ajar. I stepped across the threshold, not knowing who lived there, but knowing that who lived here knew me. I walked in half-light through the exquisitely tasteful rooms until I came to a staircase, and shivered, not only for the chill, as I mounted it. Not far from the head of the stair and to the left, a door stood opened wide. I had no choice but to go in, for this house was to be my house, and he that slept in that bed, and who woke and turned toward me as I approached it, was to be my lover. He who took me to him then, though I could not quite see his face, had summoned me from the globe's further side, and I dared not to be taken. Afterwards, I could never decide whether the dream were about losing my virginity or gaining my own home. I lived with my mother at that time, and was too separate from her in temperament to do so comfortably. We talked, after a fashion, but it was usually to disagree. When, for instance, my mother learned that a vagrant had taken up residence in the empty field behind our condominium, her first feeling was to despise him, and her first words to rail upon him as being the only likely cause of his own misfortune. My first thought was to pity him for being so alone. And yet, as I have my mother's blood in me, I came to fear him too. She grew obsessed with the worry that he would rob us, or rape us in our beds, or drag some of the garbage that littered the field onto our porch merely to spite us because we had a roof over our heads and he had none. I argue that the poor are no more likely to be spiteful than we are, but sometimes when the small hours worked their demon magic in my mind, I would think of him out there in the blackness, his buckskin jacket and his faded jeans, and my stomach would start to churn. I began to imagine, as my mother constantly claimed, that he was watching us, or more precisely, watching me. I began to pray for him to go away, not because I begrudged him the piece of earth he had staked out for himself, not because it offended me to see him there in his little security, but because the thought of him seeing me and mine made me afraid for no reason. Given my fear, I cannot explain what I did that night. I have told myself that when the door between my bedroom and the world flew open, newly waked from my recurring dream in the heat of my far-off lover, it seemed to me like the same dream starting over. In fact, it did not seem like a dream at all. I knew with full clarity that the handle of my door ought not to be turning, and I felt the full shock of knowing that it was. Too petrified to move, I saw by the light of a street lamp shining on it that my deadbolt was unlocked. I could not act to save myself, but a turning hand continued its action until I heard the click of release and the moan of swinging hinges. The figure framed by the lintel and doorpost was the one I had known I would see there, to be raped in my bed, and I could not curl a finger or breathe a sound. I heard the leathery rustle of buckskin as he approached the bed and sat on the edge. I cannot explain it, but at the moment of the most horrifying thing that had happened to me, horror deserted me. I cannot explain why, when the vagrant sat beside me, I was freed to move again. But what I did, why, God knows, what I did when I saw that seldom-washed head that, night after night, had only a spare shirt wadded up beneath it to cushion it from the ground, what I did when I saw it looking down at me was to offer it my pillow. Not in words at first, for I could not at once find my voice, but when he continued to sit there so still, not responding at all to my gesture, I heard myself whisper shakingly, "Sleep here, please. There is plenty of room." And again, when he still did nothing, "Please, for God's sake." At this he stirred and slowly shook his head, and it seemed that he might have smiled a little, though the light on his face was not good enough for me to be sure. I did not know how I expected his voice to sound, but it was not like this, so careful, so controlled, and yet so free from anything false. He said, "I did not come to be taken in, but to take you out." Then he turned back my covers, lifted me in his arms, and carried me outside, not bothering to shut the door behind him. At that moment, and that one only, what advertised itself as the voice of sanity told me to scream. I was opening my mouth to do it when the vagrant began softly to sing to himself a verse from a song my father had sung to me as a child. "What care I for a goose feather bed, with the sheets turned down so bravely, oh? For tonight I shall sleep in a cold open field, along with the raggle-taggle gypsies, oh." I shut my mouth, and never considered betraying him again. It did not take long for us to reach his camp. There was a broad, shallow pit in the midst of the field, and in the midst of the pit was a pool of oily water, with debris floating in it. The vagrant had set up housekeeping in a sort of hollow in the pit's side. This protected him from the wind in one direction, at least, and lent his bedroom the illusion of having a single wall. Tears welled up into my eyes at the sight of such an abode. Pathetic as it was in itself, it was also destitute of furnishings, but for a lumpy knapsack that did not appear to be very full. The vagrant let me down, and gestured for me to sit with a sweep of his hand and a tilt of his head that was almost courtly. When I did as he had indicated, and felt the ground hard beneath my tailbone, I realized suddenly how sparsely dressed I was, and shivered. He saw and took off his jacket and put it around me. "Now you will be cold," I objected. "But I have a spare shirt," he said, and reached into his knapsack for it. "What will you use for a pillow, then?" I realized too late that the question proved I had spied on him. He did not seem to notice. "Tonight, I think, I will not need it," he answered, and turned on his haunches toward me. At that instant the full moon burst out from behind a cloud, and I had my first clear look ever at his face. I felt that my own face had been struck hard. It was not so much that I saw beauty in his features, though that would only be to describe them honestly, but another quality was there that would have pulled me down to my knees had I been standing, and that now pushed me up onto them. I remembered hearing once in a sermon that the word holy translates the Hebrew kodesh, meaning set apart. Set apart, separated from the body of humankind. It was a holy face. He turned it from me again, and as he continued searching for his spare shirt, he drew a wooden box from his knapsack and put it aside. It looked like a boy's pirate treasure chest, covered over with paste rubies and emeralds. I was so touched that I could not resist the presumption of lifting its lid. Inside it was lined with blue satin, which could hardly be seen for the bars stacked upon bars of gold. His search succeeding, the vagrant put a heavy flannel shirt over the lighter one he already wore. When he reached to retake the box, he saw me staring stupidly at what I now knew were the real gems set in it. "Surprise," he murmured, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. I met those eyes, more faceted than any jeweler could cut, and foundered in their glistening. You thought I lived here necessarily. On the contrary, as you see, I am a man of means. A king's means, in fact." The last words were spoken so casually as to leave no doubt that he believed them true. "Then why—" "Am I here? Let me ask. If I were not here, where would you be? And would you rather be there than with me as you are?" Remembering my dream mansion and its occupant, I was not sure what to answer. Instead, I asked, "How many other vacant lots are you king of?" Only afterwards did the question sound to me as if it mocked him. Mockery, intentional or otherwise, could not cling to him. "The earth was made for us, not we for the earth," he replied. So settling all challenges to the expansive nature of his crown, the vagrant king replaced the treasure box in his knapsack, and sat behind me with his knees apart and his back against his palace wall. "You are still shivering. Come close to me." And he drew me to him, hugged me with his knees, and held me in his arms. I became aware of a thing I had already remarked unconsciously when he took me from my bed. It was clear that he must not have bathed for weeks, and so should have smelt as rank as my ancestors mostly would, to my fastidiously modern sense of cleanliness. Yet there was a scent about him that overmastered the mingled dirt and sweat, and blood and tears. I could not place it, but an image wafted from it into my mind of a thurifer swinging incense to and fro. As it came into my mind to wonder whether my freshly showered body smelt sweet to him or only insipid, he lifted my hair and kissed the hollow at the back of my neck. I knew then that I would never go back to my mother's house, and I knew, as his hands began a journey of regal conquest over all the landscape of my skin, that I myself had undertaken a journey from which never I should turn to look past my shoulder. "What are you doing?" I whispered, though the answer seemed too evident. "Touching you." Touching me. But in touching me he was doing something more. I felt anointing as with a balm of death preceding new creation flowing out of him and into me. "I am making a queen of you," he whispered back. "It may take a very long time, but no matter. I do not belong to time." He did not add, "Time belongs to me." He did not need to, for it belonged to me as I began to belong to him. I felt it resting dormant, like the merest acorn in the seed-bed of my hand, and earth's weight was a dust mote dancing on my fingertip. Though a year of nights have gone by since I left her, and the door between my bedroom and the world has never since been shut, my mother has not come through it to speak with me or meet my love. Yet I know that she watches me from her window, and I wonder if she is afraid of me now that I am his. I wonder if she can see from such a distance how greatly I have changed, and how changed is the place we inhabit. Gold is leaching from the treasure chest into the soil of the field. I see it glinting there at times. And the pool in our garden, did I once call it a pit? Is so pure that it would kill me to see myself reflected in it were I not already halfway to being royal. It is strange that still, even while sleeping in my vagrant king's arms, I sometimes dream my old dream and with quaking legs ascend the stair to my old paramour. His dwelling passes from decadence now into decay, and his failing flesh is rank with empty celebrity. I wake from his embrace with a taste in my mouth like sulphur, feeling that I have been forced back from perdition through the eye of a needle. It may be that in the house of the damned also are many mansions. It is strange to think of my old bed still waiting with its coverlet turned down, of the glitter on my old ceiling I once supposed like starlight. I am too intimately acquainted with the stars themselves now to be charmed by so unequal a simile, and it is strange to know that the world thinks of us as homeless, while even now my king is making us a home. My eyes are not enough like his yet to see all of it, but I think that I can just glimpse the lowest point of its ceiling, 10 leagues above the highest star that never frowns. Now I know the stars too well to imagine that they ever cease to smile. End.